Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Navaz Habib.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Navaz. I'm good, man. Thank you so much for having me here. You know, in this interesting time of COVID, it's always so cool to have a window and get to talk to someone like yourself, and then have that shared with your network. So it's not just sitting in my condo by myself. So it's awesome to be here. Thank you.
I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's obviously a little bit more of a sensitive topic. It's something that not everybody feels super comfortable talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to speak from experience. I'm very vanilla in my history and in my experience, and I want to be able to learn more about how we can use our experience in our sexual health and our sexual lives to be able to upgrade not only our health, but how we're living and how we're experiencing our day-to-day lives. And I think you're the perfect person to have this chat with. So I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Thank you.
I want to get started with a little bit about you, what your story is, and how you came into sexology as a practice.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't because my high school counselor was like, Stephen, I think you'd be a really good sexologist. I'll give you the kind of the Cole's Notes version of it. There were three major incidents when I was growing up. The first was I grew up Roman Catholic. So it was, not only is sex bad, you got to wait till marriage, but even thinking about sex was bad. So, I went, to church and was like, oh, I'm going to be a good Catholic and a good boy. And then I'd go to church and be like, okay, I wasn't having sex at that time, but it's like, I don't even think about sex. Don't even think about sex. And then I'd go outside and I'd see billboards and movies and books and magazine covers and all this stuff, which was sex, 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 sex. And it was like, why, how? And I then don't think about this in this guilt and this shame, and then and just not understanding why that was. It was celebrating, it was okay in some areas, but it wasn't in others. So I was very, very young. And it was just, didn't quite understand what that was all about. Fast forward to, I'm 13, 14 years old. I'm in grade 9. And I had found out that a neighborhood friend, a girl that I had played with in the neighborhood, had been sexually assaulted and abused from the age of 7 to 13 by her babysitter. And I remember that hitting me. So I'm in school and I left. And I went home and my mom was home at that time. And I remember I was crying and I was so upset about it. And, my mom was great with me. But I was just so angry, Navaz. And so I didn't quite know what to do with all of this. And so this girl came over to talk to me and to say, Stephen, listen, you've been a great friend. It wasn't about you. And what was there for me, Dr. Navaz, was I wanted to do something about it, but she was 2 years older than me. So like a 7-year-old telling a 5-year-old, I don't have the cognitive functioning to know which way is up at that point. But there was something that was there that not on my watch. This shouldn't have happened. And if there's something that I can do about that, that would actually make a difference. Now, the third incident happened when my parents love it when I share this story. So I grew up in Vancouver, BC, and have always loved nightclubs, always been a huge dancer, always loving that. But I got to a particular age when I was going to nightclubs and I was seeing my friends sisters or little brothers. And I was like, maybe I should try a different track. But I love that energy. I love hyperstimulation. So I was like, I'm going to try working in nightclubs. So my first job was working in a place called the Wild Coyote. It was the real name of a place by the airport in Vancouver. And I was a topless male waiter. And, there'd be male strippers in Vancouver. They go full Monty. And I'd be, standing there topless and with drinks or shooter tray. And I remember AJ, who was the MC of the event, said, Stephen, all you got to do is stand there and talk. And either they're going to buy drinks to shut you up or they're going to buy drinks because you're cute. And I was like, okay, done. But Navaz, what that was for me was a window I'm 20, 21, somewhere in there, a window into female sexuality that I had never seen before. Because this was a time and a place and it was safe because what they did from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, women only would come in and there'd be men there and dancing and naked men, and see the natural raw expression of female sexuality and desire was flabbergasting for me, because in society I had never seen, like, women, generally speaking, have been given more permission to be emotional, and men have been given more permission to be sexual. So this kind of flipped it on its head, and I was like, holy, there's 300 women, like, just like losing their minds and having the best time. And I was like, this is powerful. There's something palpable here that isn't outside in the world. So that was something that was really curious about me. So those were the three things that led me to, like, be very curious about sex and consume a lot of books and resources, and just fascinated with how it all works together. Now, do you want me to share my personal story?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So my personal story is I moved to Toronto now 17 years ago. And I moved here. I remember coming here. I was like, this isn't about women. It's not about sex. It's not about relationships. It's about me figuring out who I am and the difference that I want to make in the world. And then the man that I want to become, and the life and the lifestyle that I want to live, and have that from be a like a generative place or a creative place, rather than staying in Vancouver and following kind of what everybody else did. I just wanted the freedom. Freedom is a huge one of my core values. So I came here, no women, no sex, no relationships. That's not going to be my focus. And so 3 months later, I was dating Miss Toronto, which so clearly failed my plan. But she was Miss Toronto, so by default, I would tell my mom that I was Mr. Toronto, and my mom was like, "No, Stephen, that's not how that works." So I was like, "Okay, whatever." But 3 months into that relationship, I cheated on her. Now, I didn't have sex with anyone. I didn't kiss anyone. But I was bartending at that time, and I met this girl, went back to her place. She had been drinking a lot, and so I don't interact with, just, I want people sane, sober, in a good frame of mind. But I'm a huge exhibitionist, always have been. And so got naked, masturbated, orgasmed, cleaned up, put my clothes on, gave her a hug, and left. Now, what was interesting about is on my way over there, I was sober, so I drink. I don't drink. I've never had a drink in my life. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to go cheat on my girlfriend. Like, this is going through my head. And then I cab back to my place. I was like, it like hit me like a ton of bricks. It was just like this huge, this weight on my chest. And I was like, what the F did I do? And, I was just beside myself. She was away for the weekend. She came back, and I told her, and I had no expectation that the relationship was going to continue. But she said, "No, Stephen, I love you. I want to continue dating you." So I was like, okay. And so we continued dating, but I wanted to understand why I did what I did, because I was raised to love, honor, and respect women. And clearly I didn't do that. If my mom asked my dad to, like, cut off his arm, he'd be like, "Hey, which one, right or left?" And so I wanted to learn more, to understand that. But so I talked to my girlfriend at the time, and she didn't want anything to do with that. She liked the way we look. She liked the loud, the vivacious, the outgoing, like going to clubs. I love dancing, like that whole world. She didn't want to kind of deal with, like, the underbelly of me and kind of the darkness. Anyone, let's talk to your pastor, let's talk to your friends, let's talk to a therapist. And she was like, no, she's like, I don't want anything to do with that. So we continued dating, and 3 months later, she broke up with me. And she was, doing a lot of things and stepping out. And so she was moving out, starting her own business, and going back to therapy for some stuff that she had dealt with as a kid, and said, "Stephen, I'm extending myself so much that if you violate my trust again, I don't think I'll be able to recover." So Dr. Vaz, she broke up with me, and that led me into what I call my deep, dark, and dangerous days. So I was in a depression for about 18 months. And I wouldn't get out of bed. I was working at a nightclub in Toronto called This Is London. At that time, I was managing that, and it was open one night a week. So I'd go in one day to do admin work, and then I'd go in on Saturday nights. And I was just struggling, and there was so much pain and guilt and self-hatred and self-punishment in that time. It was just one of the most challenging times of my life. I didn't know how to get out of it. And the next kind of holiday season, I went back to Vancouver, and my parents knew that I had been struggling, and I'd shared with them, what was going on. And I'm sitting, it's New Year's Eve, and I had all these parties to go to, and I'm sitting at a table the kitchen table in my parents' place is this round table. My mom's sitting to my left, my dad's sitting to my right, and I just start crying. And my mom starts crying, and my dad, John DeWitt, is just kind of like, what is happening here? My dad's the less emotive of my parents. And I just didn't have anything else in me. I've been struggling for so long. And so that night I didn't go to any parties. I went to church, and I brought in the new year church. And then the next day I went to a yoga class, and it was on the flight from Vancouver back to Toronto that I made the choice that I was actually going to reach out for help and get support, because I've been trying for 18 months and just wasn't going anywhere. So I worked with a coach by the name of Dr. Tom Preston and a therapist by the name of Barbara Power. And they really worked with me, and I did a ton of work on myself and understood that, there's this part of me that loves, honors, and respects women. And then there's this part of me that is kinky and wants to explore multiple partners and is just fascinated with this world. But I've been taught that this is good, and then this other part is bad. And so in the work that I do, I was able to integrate those two things and be like, well, one is not inherently bad, one is not inherently good, but they're both healthy, natural, normal parts of who I am. But the next question for me, Dr. Navaz, was, how do I integrate those things? So I looked for myself and realized I had been kind of reading off this social script of who I was supposed to be as a straight man, and how to access sex and look at relationships and stuff like that. And I was like, that's garbage. Like, I'm good at that. Like, I could do all the right things, say all the right things, go on dates, do all this stuff, and women fall in love with me. But then there'd be drama and upset afterwards. And I was just like, I'm done with that. That's gross. That doesn't work for me anymore. So I was like, I'm going to throw that out. But then it was like, well, what do I substitute in its place? And that's where I came up with what I call my sexual core values. So honesty, respect, and safety. Now, most people, when I talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, I do that with my partner, no problem. I'm like, no, you don't. They're like, yeah, I do. I'm like, no, you don't. They're like, no, I'm always honest with my partner, and like respect boundaries, and we always use condoms. And it's like, great, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, first of all, being honest with yourself. And that's what I had to do. I had to be honest with myself. Like, this is who I am. And then respect. I had to respect myself enough to be like, hey, I can advocate and share and communicate that with someone else. And if it doesn't work for them, that's cool too. And safety for me was important, but it wasn't about safer sex. I mean, that's a huge thing. And I worked in a sexual health clinic for a number of years as well. But it was the emotional and psychological safety that was necessary for me, because that's what crushed me. It wasn't because I didn't wear a condom and my penis turned green and fell off. It was because, like, emotionally, I was so depressed, and psychologically, I was struggling so much. So I was like, okay, these are going to be my core values: honesty, respect, and safety. They're what I call my triad of trust. And so I still remember there was a lover at that time, and she was a dancer, and she was from Costa Rica. Now, she called me one day, and I'm not going to do a female Costa Rican accent, but she called me, and she's like, Stephen, are you sleeping with other women? And there was this pregnant pause. And I said, yes. And there was this other pregnant pause. And she said, I didn't expect you to say that. And I said to her, well, I didn't expect that either, but I just want to be honest with you and let you know where I'm at. And if that works for you, cool. And then she said, when can you get together next? And in that moment, this whole world of possibility, this whole realm of possibility opened up. And I was like, oh, if I can just say what I'm interested in, what I like, and not be feeling that guilt, shame, and fear around all that stuff, and just put it out there and be like, hey, does this work for you? Cool. And if it does, cool. And if it doesn't, that's cool too. And that just allowed so much freedom and so many amazing relationships and so much fun, and being able to explore and not, live within this narrative that I had been taught that I had to. And, some of the past relationships and lovers that I've had in my life, like I've emceed 2 weddings of past lovers, I've babysit kids of past lovers. They're still in my life because there was such a foundation of that honesty, respect, and safety, that trust, that integrity, that after the sex and all that other, that relationship evolves to these wonderful relationships. And then I was in a place after moving to Toronto, there was like, okay, I need to specialize in an area. I was a speaker, I had a radio program, I had a bunch of stuff going on, but it was like, I need to pick an area and focus on. And I was like, I've just gone through this massive transformation. And if I can make available this level of freedom for other people, I'm like, that's something that I can commit my life to. Now, it doesn't have to look like anything like my life did, but to be able to, so the program I work with people on is called Sex Life Unleashed. So to take those restraints off and just be your authentic self and have the type of sex and have that type of connection that you want with your partner or your partners. And that could be if you're married for 25 years, that could be like you're single and you want to explore and go to sex clubs, whatever that is. And so that started my academic journey, and I went to school and then did a clinical placement, did my doctorate, and then have been building, the brand and speaking and sharing and on social media and my online course and live immersive experiences and stuff like that ever since. So that's I said that was an abridged version, but that was like 15 minutes straight. So I'll be quiet for a little bit.
I love every conversation we have, and just goes to show the journey that you went through, that you've experienced a lot of what it is that you want to help others not have to go through, and the things that they can overcome. A really important piece of this, something that stuck out to me in your journey, is the idea of creating a safe space. And it goes to show, like, in the three stories that you initially shared, the three steps that kind of led you to who you were.
Mhm.
You had the second story where you had that close friend experience the trauma that she did, and as well, kind of that third story as well, where it was focused on you wanting to create a really safe space, a
Mhm.
really open space for people to speak, and then to go into those core values in that safe space. So the honesty, the integrity, the safety.
Yeah.
I love that, and it just goes to show that sex doesn't have to be a negative, or have a negative connotation to it. That if we talk about it in an open, honest, immersive, and positive way, that it is something to be experienced happily, and without fear of judgment, without fear of whatever else could happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the challenge therein lies is that we're not taught how to have those conversations. We don't have those, for a lot of people, don't have those safe spaces to talk about things. Maybe if it's, and I'm going to generalize here, but guys, it's like this like macho thing that we talk about. We don't talk about, what's not working in our sex lives, or maybe our bodies aren't performing the way that we want them to. And, women, it's, talking to their girlfriends, and they'll either like celebrate or complain about, guys or their partner, or gee, I wish this was. And there's, one of the things I'm committed is to diversify the dialogue in how we talk about sex, because communication, I believe, out of all the weird, wonderful, wild things that we can do with our mouths when it comes to sex, communication is the most powerful. But again, there's been this absence of it. For a lot of people, it's like, don't ask, don't tell. A lot of people, had maybe some version of sex education that didn't mention pleasure or communication, was more fear-based, or don't do this. And that really didn't serve a lot of people. So, I believe that there's an epidemic of people that are having bad sex, or quite frankly, no sex in their life. And, I'm committed to transforming it.
I love that idea that it isn't an innate thing that we all have. We don't understand sexual communication, and it is something that we have to learn. And it's something that you had to learn as you went through your journey, and finally was able to kind of get into where you are now. And I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit more. How
Yeah.
do we talk about sex in a safe space, in a healthy way? How do we talk to our partners? How do we bring this idea up where we don't have that fear of judgment?
Hmm. First of all, I think we need to be really honest with ourselves. It goes back to one of my first core values is, and the listeners here today, you can answer this for yourself, is, do you think you're good at communicating about sex? Do you think you're a good communicator? Some people are going to be like, yes, no, maybe so. Or do you think you're a bad communicator when it comes to sex? Some people are going to be like, yeah, I suck at it. I avoid it. I run, I hide, I end relationships, I do everything so I don't have to have that conversation. And I think for a lot of us, we can think, at different times where, we have handled things well or we haven't. And I think that we're both great communicators at sex and terrible communicators when it comes to sex. I think we're really good at communicating with one person, ourselves. We have all the justifications, all the reasons, all the rationales, all the stories, all the why it's their fault or this happened or this shouldn't have happened or why I can't do this or my body is this, blah, 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 blah. We have all those stories. We communicate and justify for ourselves, the reasons why the sex is not happening or not happening the way that we like it. And I like to say that the sexual relationship that we have with ourselves is mirrored in the sexual relationship that we have with other people. So when I work with people through, my courses and my retreats, it's about them developing that relationship with themselves and developing that understanding. Mm-hmm. So, we going back to the communication piece, it's how do you communicate with yourself? If we take a moment and just hit pause and listen, we always have that voice in the back of our head. So I'm just going to hit pause for 1 second and have everybody just listen to that voice. So that's the voice that was like, what? How long? Is it going to go for longer? Is it just going to be dead air? This is a podcast. Isn't it supposed to be engaging? What's going on? Who's this Dr. Stephen DeWIT guy, this sexologist? I wonder what his sex life is like. Is he straight? Is he gay? What, there's all these questions that are constantly going on for us. And so to be able to be responsible for that is a big step in moving towards that really healthy communication, because that is the most important thing, is that communication, first of all, with yourself and learning what are those messages that I tell myself that still serve me, and what are those messages that don't serve me anymore. Maybe they served me when I was 13 years old, 9 years old, or whatever, and I had to be a good boy or be a good girl or protect myself or whatever that is. But now it gets in my way. I can't have that. That story doesn't serve me anymore. That 9-year-old is still driving the bus. How do I take the wheel back? And so, I think it's so important to look at as human beings, our greatest desire is to be loved and to be accepted. And our greatest fear is to be judged and made wrong. And so communication can get stuck and it can get weird and ugly and awkward. And, I can tell you so many stories, Navaz, about how I miscommunicated or mishandled or wasn't able to communicate the way that I wanted to communicate. But what I want to share with you is a 4-step process that I created to make it easier, set that, like you said, that really safe place to have those conversations and greatly increase the chances of you hearing yes. Because I think I can speak for everybody. We'd all like to hear more yeses in our life. So it's called the LITA technique. So LITA. So if anybody wants to write this down, please, maybe in the show notes, LITA. So it's called the LITA technique. So one of the things that when I was doing my research about communication and sex that was missing is a context. So people kind of use what I call the blah approach. They just kind of blurt out whatever's there and there's no context set. So, you sit down, and I'm like, hey, Navaz, I want to spank you. And you're like, what? What is that? Why? How? Is this punishment? Is this what is this? There can be so many things. There's no context set. The second challenge that I saw is it's often a one-way communication. Someone wants to just get something off their chest and say something, and it's not a co-created. That second person doesn't feel invited or it's safe or included in that conversation. That person just kind of blurts that stuff out. So that's why I developed the LITA technique. So there's 4 steps to it, LITA. So the first step, the first 2 steps is about setting that safe context. So the L stands for sharing what you like or love about that person or the relationship. Now you may be like, well, I'm new in the relationship, so I haven't used the L word, so I don't say it. So it's just about the relationship or the time that you spend together. So again, the first step is sharing what you like or love about that person in the relationship. The I stands for what's important to you. Said another way is like, what are you committed to for the future of this relationship? So when you share those two things, the person can be like, oh, okay, so, Navaz likes and loves me because of this. And, it's important that we have open communication about our sex life because we want to have a great sex life for the rest of our lives. So that sets that safe. So that person can just be like, okay. And then you bring up the T, right? LIT. And that's the topic. What do you want to talk about? So you could say, so you share what you like or love, you share what's important, what you're committed to for the future. And then you could say, I want to talk about spanking. But now there's kind of like those bookends, right? Their mind's not going to like go all over the place. They're like, oh, okay, cool. And then the A, it's actually A to the power of 2 or A squared because it stands for ask. And there's 2 questions you're going to ask. The first one, you're going to ask if they're open to having that conversation right now, because they may not be. And I don't know, Dr. Navaz, if you're anything like me, when someone comes up and they're like, hey, Navaz, do you have some time to talk? I want to talk. And you're like, no. And they keep talking over you. You want to punch them in the throat, right? So you want to be sensitive that your partner may not be in that space to have that conversation. Maybe, the dog ran away. They got their boss yelled at them. Their mom's sick, whatever's going on in their life. So you want to be respectful. So you want to ask them, are you open to having this conversation right now? If they say no, don't worry. It's not a code red. Just be like, great, when would be a good time to have this conversation? If they say yes, or if they say no, you say, great, because I'd really love your feedback. I'd really love your thoughts. And that is what brings it in. Now has it be a co-creative conversation, not just you blurting stuff out because you're not happy or awkward or uncomfortable or weird about stuff. And that communication tool just makes such a big difference for people in their lives and their relationships. And the cool thing about the LIDA technique, you don't just have to use it with your partner. It doesn't have to be about sex. I had this great guy who I was speaking in Toronto, and he was in the front row. And as a speaker, you always love the people who are like smiling and nodding and making eye contact and loving. So, I could clearly tell he was enjoying what I was talking about. He comes up to me afterwards. He's like, hey, Dr. DeWitt. And I was like, just call me Stephen. It's cool. He's like, hey, Stephen. He's like, I really liked that. That LIDA technique was awesome. I was like, great, Omar. I'm happy to hear that. Finish things up, sign my books. And then the next day I'm in my office and bing, I get this email alert. So I check it out and it's like from Omar. He's like, hey, Dr. DeWitt. He's like, I used the LIDA technique with my boss and it was amazing. And I was like, great for you, Omar, high five, whatever. And then like 3 minutes later, bing, I get this other email. I open it up. He's like, oh my God, Stephen, I'm not having sex with my boss. And I just like laughed and I was like, no, it's cool, man. Like I get it. So that's one of the most powerful communication tools that I have that I would really, and like anything, it takes a bit of practice, but using that in your life can just have the conversations be so much deeper, so much richer. And like I said before, increase the chances of you hearing a yes than people getting, especially around sex, that the defensive, that judgment, that fear, that, withdraw that can often come up in those conversations.
I love that. It's so clear the importance of context and creating that safe space using the tools that you've provided here, the LIDA technique. Sounds like something that we could use in so many different aspects of our lives, and something that can be particularly useful when we're speaking to a partner about something where we don't want to just blurt out what we're dealing with, or what's going on in our head. And so I think when there is that incongruency between what you yourself are hoping to achieve, or what you would like to experience in your sex life, and there is that incongruency with what is actually going on with your partner, bringing it up using that contextualized LIDA technique would be a great way to do that.
Yeah, it makes a big difference for people. They love it.
I think the next kind of important thing here is the importance of language when it comes to sex, and the words that we use when we are talking to our partners, when we're talking about sex.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all about kind of the using the right words, and wanting to create a positive spin, or a positive experience when it comes to these things. And a lot of us are learned or taught to not talk about sex because it is considered negative or taboo or something in that realm.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what you've learned over your time as a sexologist. in the words and the language that people can use, and where we can probably benefit ourselves. What are some things we can do about that?
So I'll take a further step back from where we started from and look at a context of, if you want to make a difference or improve your sex life or transform it, is asking yourself the question, what would make my partner comfortable? And when you come, not what's going to please me, what do I want, what's going to get me off, what's going to get me wet, what's going to get me hard, what's going to get me orgasms, what's going to, like, no, is like, what's going to have my partner comfortable?
Mhm.
Now, if we come from that place, it's looking, I say sex is a symptom of what's going on in the relationship. And Dr. Vaz, I know this is what you deal with, what's going on in your body, right? There may be comorbid things that are happening in your body you need to deal with. But in my world, what I focus on is a symptom of what's going on in the relationship. Number one, again, like I said, the relationship with yourself. And number two, the relationship with your partner. And if you can't get in their world and look at things from their perspective and just look at from what you want and what works for you, it's going to be really challenging. So for, again, coming from that contextual place is what's going to make your partner feel comfortable? Because
Mhm.
someone's got to take that first step. If you're just keep butting heads, you have the same conversation again and again and again. It could be with, the partner you've been with for a long period of time, or you kind of like have this like rotating door of people that are in your life for a particular amount of time, and the same things show up again and again and again. So being able to look at, hey, what's going to have them be comfortable? I'm going to take the step first to find out and think about from their point of view what makes them comfortable. And then often, if you're in a healthy relationship, the person's going to be like, oh, damn, Navaz didn't do what he usually does. He was really nice and kind and understanding. And like, I feel more comfortable. I'm going to take a step up. And then you're going to be like, oh, shit, like that. They didn't do that. And then you can start building off of that. And one of the things to circle back around is language. So listen, there's all sorts of, we can do a whole other podcast about language of sex and what that actually means. But one of the tenets that I learned when I was a sexual health counselor here in Toronto at the Hassle Free Clinic is mirror the language that your partner uses. In my situation was, mirror the language that the client uses. So there are triggering words, and let's be real. There's a lot of words that are profanity or offensive that come from a sexual context. But if you want to refer to your body part in a particular way, and the other part I'll add is in a particular realm. So you may go to the doctor and talk about penis and vulva, and when with your partner you're talking about pussy and cock, or pussy and pussy, or cock and cock, or let's keep this open as far as how people identify their bodies and what they have with what's between their legs. So that's something that I think is important, is understanding that mirroring your partner's words is helpful, and understanding that they're going to be different in different contexts. The last thing I'll add is, listen, sometimes there's triggers. Some word brings back bad memories. It is something that or was instilled with you from a very young age that is a dirty word, or you don't say it, or whatever that is. And there's two ways that I approach that. One is obviously respecting boundaries. That's really important. But two is, if this is a word for yourself, is like, why is that? Where does that come from? Because I believe that a lot of people walk in the world sexually unconscious, right? This is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what turns me on. This gets me hard. This gets me wet. And this is perverted. This is gross. And this is really hot and sexy. And they haven't done the deeper work to understand what I call their sexual blueprint.
Mhm.
So how did they become the way they became? How does that trigger, that fear, that word, that guilt, that shame? Where did that come from? Because as babies, and I know, Dr. Navaz, you're having a baby this Thursday, or your wife is, and when this comes out, you probably already have it. So congratulations, and I wish you all the best. But
Thank you.
when we have a newborn, they got two fears: the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. So everything else has been a learned response. And so while you want to be respectful of your partner's boundaries, you may want to ask them, hey, like, have you ever like thought about like where that comes from and why that fear is, or where that resistance comes from? And is that something that, you think would be helpful to like work through or deconstruct and substitute something that is healthy for you? And they're going to say yes or no. And again, we're all on our own journey of, I always say we're sexually evolving beings. So it may not be that time where they're like, yeah, I want to dig into that, but it could be something in the back of their head. They're like, oh, I should bring that up, or I want to do some work, or I want to, talk to Dr. DeWitt or whatever it is that they're willing to step into and do that work. So that's what I would say in a general sense about words and language.
I love that mirroring and being able to make sure that it's something that your partner is comfortable with,
Yeah.
and words that they feel comfortable using allows for a level of trust to be built very simply, and you're not just going out and jumping three levels up from where they're at. So
Yeah. And
that's
listen, sometimes dirty talk is hot. You want to like amp things up. You want to have some fun. You want to be cool. Like these are the things that you can use. And again, setting that context and having that understanding and having that conversation is really important even before you step into that. If that's something new that you're going to be trying with your partner, because all of a sudden they're at work or whatever, they're in the next room working, and you send them a text and you're like, what the F? Like, what's going on with that? So yeah, it can be a lot of fun and can add some excitement into people's sex life.
So awareness obviously is a really big piece of this, and
Mhm.
awareness of your own personal feelings, how you are experiencing your sex life, awareness for what it is that you want and for what is currently going on.
Mhm.
I want to take a step into that awareness
Mhm.
area and talk a little bit more about awareness of what's going on with your body, and awareness of what your body itself is trying to tell you, and learning what those little triggers or those little thoughts may mean. I realize it's a really big topic, but let's start in dipping our toe in a little bit there.
Sure. So if we take a like 40,000 foot view of this, if we look at sex and if we look at good sex, and when that actually happens, it's when we're relaxed, when we feel safe, when we trust the other person, when there's a level of connection with the other person. And that could be a love connection, that could be a lust connection, that could be a one night stand, whatever that is for you. It's a connection with another human being. And when those things aren't there, the safety, the trust, and that connection, our bodies are not going to respond the way they, naturally would or normally would sexually. So I mean, I've worked with so many clients over the years where they come to me initially presenting with, you know, uh, dryness issues if they're vulva owners, or erectile challenge penis problems if they're penis owners. And then we like get into it, and it's like, oh, this isn't about like this particular part of my body that's not functioning or not quote unquote performing the way that it should. It's because my brain is not in a place. I always say that we have to have alignment with our head, our heart, and our crotch. And if those things aren't aligned, the chances of good sex happening, it's greatly diminished. So I talk about our ancestors, if they were running away from a saber-toothed tiger, running, they weren't running with like giant erections or lots of lubrication happening, right? They're like, holy crap, I got to get the F out of here. It's not a safe, comfortable, trusting, connected relationship when there's something at risk. So often people will, present with different things. And the work that I do is like, well, what is actually going on? Again, number one, with the relationship with yourself. What is the stuff that's going on over here? And then secondly, what's going on inside of your relationship with your partner? And starting in those areas, for me, is what I do. The other thing, and I know, Dr. Navaz, this is your area of specialization, is I tell them to go see an expert. Tell them to go see your doctor. If it's, Chinese medicine, if that's way, if it's functional, if it's traditional, whatever it is, but let's go to your doctor and find out what's actually, if there are some things that are going on for your body. It could be hormone levels, it could be stress levels, it could be all sorts of different things, but let's get a clean bill of health and then, dig into the stuff that I specialize in.
I love that. And yes, a great 40,000 foot view. Obviously, it's something that if we wanted to, we could get into for a whole
Oh, for
nother
sure.
session. But being aware that there are different types of stressors that will trigger
Mhm.
different reactions, that there are both biochemical and physical triggers that could create that stress that doesn't allow you to experience the positive and the benefits of a healthy sex life, as well as the emotional and psychological triggers, whether there's a challenge in the relationship, whether there's something going on with your partner and there's some incongruency going on over there, or something that might have happened in the past that could create a psychological response as well.
Yeah.
So just awareness really being the key, and seeking help where needed and where necessary. And I think that is an amazing place for us to kind of step out of this from. I want to talk about, and then I realize it's probably one of the most common questions that you get asked,
Mhm.
but as relationships progress and continue for many years, I imagine that you get this question a lot. How do you keep the fire alive when
Mm.
somebody's been with someone for 25 years? What are the things that you've heard, and kind of what are the best tips you have for somebody who's been with the same partner for a very long time, as many of my clients have?
Yeah. So there's a couple general rules that I would share. So one is always be in communication. Even if you're not having sex, it's just be like, hey, I noticed that we haven't had sex this month, and I just want to check in with you, see what's going on for you, and kind of share what's going on for me. Because god damn it, you're gonna have two kids in like 3 days, right? And so there's gonna be priorities. You're not sleeping. There's all sorts of stuff that you're dealing with, but there's somewhere along the way, the accounting or the mathematics of sex was taught to us that more is better, longer is better, bigger body parts or smaller body parts, depending, is better. We need to be like multiple orgasms is better. All this stuff is like more, more, more. And I'm a big fan of keeping the accounting and keeping the mathematics out of your sex life and just chatting with your partner, just talking with them about what's going on. Because so that's the first thing that I'll say. So communication always number one. The second part is understanding that how your body responds and reacts sexually is going to change. Now, again, we've been conditioned that sex, when it's like our younger versions of ourselves, probably a few pounds less, maybe more hair for Navaz and I, and these young, virile, new, bodies and muscle and all that other kind of good stuff. That's what sexy is, and that's when great sex happens. And so we can often be very myopic in our view of sex and very limited in our view of sex. And as we grow older and grow older potentially with a partner, I think it's always important to have an open mind and allow things to evolve and allow yourself to, number one, meet where you're at sexually, and then be able to create something that works for your partner. The third thing I would say is look at sex like a smorgasbord, like it's a buffet, even though you can't have buffets right now because of COVID. But we often get stuck in the same sex dance, doing the same thing. Navaz, if I asked you, if I asked, your listeners, if you asked me, it's like, oh yeah, I say this thing or I do this thing or I touch my partner there or they say or do or touch something on me, and then this leads to this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and then I do this, and then this happens, and then quote unquote, ideally there's mutual orgasm and fireworks and like the orchestra in the background, and then we go to sleep, right? So there's some version of this sex dance that we do that we get really attached to. And as we evolve sexually, as our bodies change and evolve, that may not work for us for many different reasons. Our bodies don't respond, your partners don't respond. It doesn't turn you on. You've done it enough. Maybe it was really hot at the beginning, or you tried something, and I do a lot of talking about kink as well. Kink is just something that's new, right? Because after you've done that kinky thing that in your head you're like, oh damn, that would be hot, but I've never done that before. After you've done it for 5 years, it's not kinky anymore. It's just part of your sex life. So when you look at sex like a buffet, it's looking at it like, not okay, this is the one meal. Like, you love pizza, but if you had pizza every single day for the rest of your life, you get sick of pizza. But we get this, again, this very narrow view of this is what sex has to be and this is what it looks like, rather than opening up and diversifying that connection. We get so caught up in the vehicle of sex that we forget the destination. So you say the vehicle of sex is what it looks like, the color of the car, if it's, got Wi-Fi in the car, if it's an electric car, if it has power, if it has all this other kind of stuff. We get so worried about that, we don't get to our destination. where our destination is like fun and connection and love and pleasure and all this kind of juicy stuff. We don't even get there because we're so caught up in what it looks like. And so I really encourage people to step into like looking at sex as a smorgasbord and exploring different ways that you can connect with your partner. And I think that's really powerful and allows things to stay alive and allows things to evolve with you and your partner or your partners like well into, I've worked people in their like 70s and 80s that are still having amazing sex. But does it look like it did when they were 20? No. Is it still amazing and great and satisfying? Hell yes. So those are the top level things that I'd share with you.
I love that so much. And I believe it all does begin with strong levels of communication and honesty and trust and safety between partners. And I absolutely love every minute of this conversation. I love every minute of chatting with you, Stephen. This was
Thank you.
absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend to all of the listeners, please go follow Stephen on Instagram, on TikTok, at Dr. DeWIT. And please make sure you go check out his website if this is something that you're definitely interested in. I'm aware that working with Stephen is one of the best things that people can do for themselves from a sexual health perspective and being able to upgrade the way that they experience their sexual lives. Thank you so much for being here, Stephen. Any last words from you?
First of all, thank you for having me. Last words, what I'll say is, in this very interesting time that we find ourselves and life is so precious. Nobody died saying, I had too much great sex in my life. And the pursuit of that and being able to create that in your life is really embracing life and squeezing out all the juice that you possibly can from this life. And I think it's one of the most important natural self-expressed states that we can be in, and everybody deserves that, and it's a right of everybody, and I'm committed that each and every person has that. So thank you so much.
What an amazing conversation. I will be sharing all of the tips and tricks on the show notes. So please make sure to check those out. Thanks again, Stephen. And yeah, have a great day, guys.